Okay, it says going live. Take 30 seconds. It says going live. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to be having time my Weights and Biases Cup. I had the opportunity to interview Sebastian Raschka I think it was quite a few months ago, and it's always an honor to learn from him. Sebastian, thanks again for your time, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for organizing that. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about exciting things again. So last time I remember was a lot of fun, and I hope we are going to have fun again here.
I'm sure you won't be surprised, but for me, it was one of the best received episodes on the podcast. So thanks for making that happen. I'll share my screen to give the audience an introduction about you, although I'm sure most of them don't need this, but I would still like to do that. There we go. So you can find Sebastian on Twitter. His handle is RASBT. He's the incoming lead AI educator at Grid.ai. We'll be talking a lot about this, and he's been the associate professor of statistics at the University of Madison. You can also check out his website, which is there on his Twitter profile. I have the second and the third edition of my book near my desk, which also we'll be talking about. And I would also highly encourage all of you to check out Sebastian's YouTube channel. It has a lot of very high content educational videos, things that I always try to watch and always end up learning a lot from them. Did I miss anything from there?
Actually, yeah, you covered so many things. I'm really flattered, actually. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's about it, me in a nutshell, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
So I'd love to start by talking about the book. Like I said, I've owned all three editions, and you've been teasing out I think it's the fourth edition of the book. So if you could tell us more about what's coming up. And another question, since you've been focusing on lectures on PyTorch, will the book be now in PyTorch?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So usually we say all good things come in threes, right? So 3 editions, but there will be a new edition. Actually, we have been working on that since summer. So mostly this summer, I was working on this a lot. And there have been a lot of changes, really a lot of changes, which is why it will not be called the 4th edition. It will be actually an entirely new title. So we haven't, I think, 100% decided yet, but it will be something along the lines of machine learning with PyTorch and scikit-learn. So like you said, kind of like related to the PyTorch lectures I was teaching, there will be a focus on PyTorch. So switching from TensorFlow to PyTorch. But maybe just top of my head, like just stepping through all the things we worked on this summer, or also in the upcoming last couple of months. So I've been like mostly tweaking the first couple of chapters in terms of refining them and coming up with sometimes better visuals, because over the course of the years there have been so many questions by people about certain things that I've felt like, okay, if I have a better figure here, that could probably address a lot of these questions that some people have. So then I remember a lot of time was spent like on new sections. Actually, like I was writing a new section on gradient boosting for classification. I felt like that was a really important thing to have, because gradient boosting, I would say, is among the most I wouldn't say most widely used machine learning algorithm, although it might be actually. If I think back of the Kaggle survey that came out, it's one of the most widely used ones. And I didn't
There's
have
a bias because Kagglers really use boosting trees a lot. So sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's a good point. It's like a chicken egg problem, right? Because this algorithm is successful in Kaggle, and I think the Kaggle survey is more general in terms of asking people. But you're right; it's mostly people who probably are familiar with Kaggle, and if you see that it wins competitions, you probably start using it, and then it's kind of like this. Almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy here. But no, I think it's actually a very powerful method for tabular data sets. So I added a section on that. One thing it took me quite some time was going back to the original paper, because there is no good resource on gradient boosting for classification, like explaining it. It's usually only about regression examples. In my lectures themselves, I only always had regression examples because it's simpler to explain. So I went back and rewrote this for using the logistic loss for classification. That was one big thing. I was also completely rewriting the backpropagation section because I felt like it was something I wrote like 2014, 15. And due to the way I was teaching it in like the context of the class, I felt like I could have explained that way better or cleaner. And so in that way, yeah, like making these little changes. But like you said, one big change will be that it is based on PyTorch. So I got a co-author who helped me a lot with this because it's like 19 chapters now. It's such a long book. And so Hayden Liu helped me a lot, or was basically in charge of converting the TensorFlow chapters to PyTorch. And then I also recently added a section, let's say, on PyTorch Lightning. And this summer, with Ben Kaufman, I wrote a graph neural network chapter, which is a brand new chapter. Because, yeah, we have been working a lot on graph neural networks for molecular data. So like in the context of generating molecules, but then also classifying bioactivity of molecules. So that will be a new chapter. And with Jitian Zhao, I worked on a transformer chapter, so language transformers. It was also a huge chapter. I just got it back a few weeks ago from the reviewers to do some final editing. So it's currently the last chapter I'm editing, and I'm hoping then the book will be finalized maybe hopefully end of the month, or maybe early January. We will see. I mean, we don't have an official timeline. I don't want to make any promises, but it's not too far away. It's like the final stages. So every evening I'm spending a couple of hours and making the final tweaks, but it's getting there. Long story short, I'm really excited about this because it's like a big overhaul. I mean, the previous editions have also been big overhauls, always something new. But this time I feel like really it's really exciting because I also teach in PyTorch, and then having everything neatly in PyTorch and everything a little bit refined, I think it will be really nice.
As a reminder to the people watching live, I know I'm greedy about this opportunity, so I'm asking the questions, but this is for you. So please keep the questions coming and I'll ask them. Since I don't see any, I'll ask this. Have you personally seen any changes in maybe your students as you've made these changes to different frameworks? I know you keep tweeting about this, how you're experimenting with new ideas. You're also super active about being on top of research papers, also constantly reading through Reddit. So as you've shifted through TensorFlow to from TensorFlow 1 then to PyTorch, have you seen any changes in the students as well?
That's a very good question. Actually, I haven't taught a class in TensorFlow. I used TensorFlow back then myself, but that was before I was joining the university for teaching. So actually, while the third edition was in TensorFlow, that was in 2019, I was actually teaching already in PyTorch. So we tweaked like the second edition to the third edition by using the eager API. So the eager mode in TensorFlow, like using the tf.keras and so forth. But at this time, I was already mainly using PyTorch and also in teaching. So I honestly don't have experience with teaching in TensorFlow. I only used it back then, a long time ago. I still sometimes look at examples in TensorFlow. I think it has evolved a lot. It's a really nice tool. I must say, though, it's just when PyTorch came out, it kind of clicked a little bit with me in terms of how AutoGrad works and the computation graphs work. And I kind of really like it. So it's why I used it for teaching. And can't really say how, let's say, how students appreciate like the difference between TensorFlow and PyTorch. Yeah, but I must say in general, teaching, I teach both like the deep learning class and the machine learning class. And PyTorch, even though, let's say, it's kind of intuitive for a deep learning framework, it's still a steep learning curve. So teaching something in PyTorch, it's kind of still very difficult if you have not had any experience with machine learning and deep learning, like learning this from scratch, because it's a lot of overhead if you compare that, for example, to scikit-learn. Scikit-learn, it's I mean, even scikit-learn could be a lot. I remember when I learned scikit-learn, it was like, wow, there's so much stuff. How does it all work and everything? And it took like maybe a year or something to really get comfortable with everything, because you can do very powerful things like with the pipelines, chaining things together, the column transformer, heterogeneous data sets, like figuring all that out. It takes a lot of practice, I would say. And then PyTorch is even more complicated on top of that, because it's more, I would say, lower level, because in scikit-learn you have a fit function and then it just fits the model, it's ready to use. Whereas in PyTorch you really have to, or in general in deep learning, you have to really look at the loss over the training time, like to tweak hyperparameters in the way that you want to see if it converges. You have to write your training loop yourself. So it's more like way more nitty-gritty hands-on. So in that way, yeah, it is still a steep learning curve, but it's also a lot of fun. I really like that. It's like I like tinkering with things, so I kind of appreciate to be more hands-on and trying things out and toying around with things.
For the audience, I just wanted to remind them that you've put up 170 lectures, a lot of which are in PyTorch, and this is one of the best resources in my biased opinion on PyTorch, as if they want to start up.
Well, thank you.
Have you played around with JAX at all? Do you have any thoughts about that framework?
Very good question. It's something on my to-do list. It's like I'm kind of familiar with it. I looked at it. I know approximately how it's, let's say, different from PyTorch, where in PyTorch you more like have the computation graph with you differentiate with respect to the output. In JAX, what's nice is you create derivatives of functions directly. So you have like a derivative function and things like that. I think it can be very useful in certain contexts, but in my applied work, there was no, I would say there was no reason to really dive into it in way more detail and experiment with it. And then I saw there are also many libraries on top of it. I think Haiku, Flux, and I was like, maybe I will save that for another day. Yeah, no, it looks nice. I think it's good to always have these options and different things for slightly different niche, not niche, but like slightly different research focus areas where the Flex or JAX Flex frameworks might be more better for certain types of theoretical work, whereas for other things, PyTorch might be a better choice. So it's good to have these options. For my purposes, I haven't had the need to use JAX yet, which is why I was putting it off a little bit. Same thing with Julia. I think Julia is a very nice language, but it's always like, okay, the day has 24 hours. There are so many cool things. Which one?
I think your day has like at least 50 hours.
Yeah. It's like always, yeah, you have to make trade-offs. Yeah.
This is a question from the audience. What are you learning currently yourself? Machine learning related or broadly?
Yeah, so for me, it's usually I pick a topic and I learn by topic. Usually, if there's something I find interesting, then I dive into these individual topics. For example, recently, because I was also teaching in that a lecture on that, I was looking into performance metrics like Matthew's correlation coefficient. I was going down a rabbit hole and these types of comparisons, but in more general terms, what I was actually just learning yesterday is unrelated to machine learning, but it is Adobe Premiere. Because yeah, I wanted to kind of also, what I did is when we were switching to online teaching, I was just really just figuring out things on the fly, and I just used iMovie on the Mac and doing these types of things. And then I moved to a different apartment where I have right now a lot of background noise. I got like this Yeti microphone. And there's some automatic software, and I was just last week trying to get this to work because I don't want to have all the background noise, but then they have like this nice software that removes it. I did a few recordings and it was just dropping out totally my voice at the end of each sentence because it was too aggressive in terms of removing background noise. And then I went down that rabbit hole of figuring out, okay, what software can I use to kind of fix that? And I mean, there are these different paradigms. People like what is it called, Final Cut and Logic, and then there is the Adobe suite with Audition and Premiere. And since I have Adobe subscription already, I thought, okay, let me try this out. And then I was just yesterday in that rabbit hole of watching videos how to edit your video in Premiere and also doing the audio editing, so which I hope will help me making better lecture videos now in the future, now that I have figured things out. Because yeah, I can't really use the software, the Yeti software, because it's too aggressive, and I will just use the raw voice and then do some editing. But this is really, I found it really fascinating. I thought always, I was watching YouTube videos myself, and I'm always like, I took it for granted that the quality is as good as it is. So I was always like, well, that is just something that happens to be good quality, but then I never really appreciated how much work it takes to set everything up and do the editing and edit out all the ums and ums, and then also removing the echo and the background noise. And yeah, so it's actually a lot of work. It's like I can see that it's like it's a full-time job, maybe even doing that. So yeah, but I don't want to get into this nitty-gritty detail where I spend like hours and hours on it. But I wanted to do at least have a little understanding to like make some tweaks and improve things here and there. So I found that kind of like fascinating, actually. Nothing to do, actually it can have something to do with machine learning, because I'm pretty sure they use some machine learning algorithms under the hood now. So there's actually also, last thing about this, there's like this service. So one other issue is subtitles or closed captioning, because I have this very strong German accent. When I was doing the subtitles for my online lectures, I just uploaded them to YouTube, and for some reason YouTube was always, even though I was speaking in English, it was thinking I was speaking German, and then it was doing these closed captions that didn't make sense at all. And yeah, what I ended up using was I think it was called Otter.ai, and they can actually do really good closed
I
captioning.
use the same tool
Oh
for
yeah,
the
and I think
podcast.
it's based on deep learning, right? So in that way, so there's like full circle. We are back at deep learning here. So yeah.
That's also a very interesting bias in the YouTube captioning system, right? If it's defaulting to German.
Yeah, there was like, and there was no setting to change it. I mean, sometimes I think deep learning and machine learning is very powerful. It's very cool if it can do things automatically, but sometimes forcing it to always automatically do something, I'm not sure if that's necessary. There could be an option like I want this or I don't want this. So, and I think maybe they changed it now, but back then there was no option to turn off this auto guessing. So that was kind of like annoying. Yeah.
And on this topic, as you're now optimizing to make sure your video quality is high, which is presumably being broadcasted compared to, I assume, inside of a lecture hall, it would be a completely different scenario. Did you miss the person-to-person interaction, and what are your thoughts on the comparisons?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I actually, I really like the in-person interaction, especially when you explain something, and of course you want everyone to understand everything. But it is very satisfying if, let's say, someone has a question and the person, let's say, didn't understand something because you went to it over it too quickly, or it was just too complicated, and then you explain it again and you see the person light up in the way like, whoa, that makes so much more sense now. I really like this type of like where you feel like you're helping someone really to understand something and they really appreciate it. I really miss that one. So I mean, we have in-person lectures right now, but it is something that you don't have, let's say, when you make a video and upload the video. So that is something I really like this type of where you really get this feedback. Okay, this person really it makes, so you put some work into it and the person really appreciates it, and you feel like you're helping someone there. Like you see that live basically, which is really cool, I think.
For the online version, do you have any pros and cons, if I may, that you really enjoy? Because you also put up lectures on the same lectures on YouTube, and many people like me get to learn them from different countries.
Yeah, so an advantage of online is that, yeah, it's something you produce and then you have it. If you're happy with it, you can focus on other things then. I like in-person teaching, but I feel like also, let's say if you would do that for 10 years or 20 years, every year I update my lectures, so I make some changes, but there's also the danger that you learn yourself more things and you add and add and add more things to the lectures. So the lectures become longer and longer and longer because there are so many more things you want to talk about that you just recently got excited about. And if you make an online lecture, it's like, okay, you make this online lecture at this point in time, and yeah, you I would say you can then move on and work on other things in terms of new topics rather than doing the same topic again and again. You feel like, okay, I can now do new things, right? So I think it's in that way maybe a better time efficiency wise, where you do something like you do a course and then you can have, in the end, instead of doing the course again next year or something, you can have additional topics. So, or maybe every so and so many years you want to also change the course, or these types of things. But in general, I think it's a time efficiency thing. You can also reach more people with that. I mean, it's like you have like a bigger audience in that way, where you don't require people to come in person. And it's also more, that was one important point, it's also way more flexible in terms of people can learn whenever they want to learn, so they don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time. One disadvantage I heard from students is it can be harder to focus. And I have that problem too. When I watch videos, there's my email, there's something else. And it's like I watch a video for 10 minutes and then I catch myself thinking about something and checking my email or something. And then, I should, I really have to be more disciplined to to focus really. And that is easier in person, I think. But I have also a tool kind of like that automatically quits programs that I'm opening when I'm in like this focus mode. So yeah, you have to be a little bit more disciplined about that. But yeah, another advantage, by the way, is of video is that you can go back. So right, you can pause and go back, and you can watch it multiple times, which I noticed is eliminating a lot of questions. In previous years, where we only had in-person lectures, students came to me often with questions, and it's just fine. But when we had the recordings, it's because sometimes people miss something because it was too fast. They can just go back and watch it again. Of course, there are also a lot of questions, but there are different types of questions, I noticed. They are more about additional topics rather than topics we covered already, which I find also interesting. Yeah, so related to also going back and these types of things. So this semester we have an in-person lecture. So I go there in person and give the lecture, but I also record the lecture because yeah, you never know. I mean, based on also we have the COVID situation, and I don't want to force students, let's say, to come to the classroom if they don't feel well. So they have the option also to watch it online, and students really appreciated that. I mean, they watch it, so they attend the lecture, but then they can also go back and watch it again if things were unclear and these types of things. So I think both have advantages. I find it also interesting to think about what's the future of education. Is it like, are we going back to in person, or will it be entirely online? And I don't know how it will be, but I can see, yeah, the education more shifting to online because it's just more efficient in that way. It's almost like if you think about a movie and a theater. Like movies are really the high quality polished things. You can have it in multiple theaters, like movie theaters, and people all over the world can watch it. It costs more money to make. It's more polished. But it's something, yeah, everyone can watch. And then you have in-person theaters, which is where you have people playing live or acting live, which is also super cool. But I would say most of the time we would go to movie theaters because also, let's say, tickets are cheaper and it's more, it's easier to have that everywhere, or even watching movies at home nowadays, basically. But theaters in person are this very special experience. You do it maybe once in a year or even less than that. I think it's something very special, and it is very well appreciated because it's so much work to do this live. It's just a very different type of skill almost. And I feel like it could be also similar with that, like similar to that with online education, where you have the videos and everything, but then you can have live sessions, let's say occasionally, like workshops that are live, where you can really provide more feedback in person, where you have some more hands-on parts or something like that. So I think there is a place for both things. Both have different trade-offs, but it will be interesting to see how we make best use of our, let's say, time, but also learn. So it goes for both. I mean, time is both for the instructors, but also for the students, right? What is like, how do we optimize that? I mean, always comes back to also having a good time and experience, right? So yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, yeah, so how that develops.
That was such an amazing analogy between live theaters and movies at the cinemas. I feel like with creating content, it's always like filling this gap. And sorry to use my example, but it's like whenever you feel, maybe I'm assuming for you that there's a certain topic you'd like to cover, you might be able to create a lecture around it. So teasing out, what are your plans for teaching at Grid.ai? You'll be the AI lead educator there. What will you be creating, or what can we expect from you?
That's a very good question. Yeah, so what will I be doing at Grid.ai? So I don't want to, let's say, honestly, this will be the details are not ironed out yet, so I can't say too much yet. So I will be officially starting next month, and there will be more like the time to also really think and plan the next things. But I can already tell you it will probably somewhere around education and creating online content, and probably more like on the video side or online course side rather than writing. Although I really like writing too, so we will see how to balance this, because I think also both have advantages, like written content and video content. I noticed that myself. For example, when I was just yesterday learning about Adobe Premiere, that you can write about these things, but I really needed to see the settings because this interface is so complicated. And when someone told me, okay, set the noise reduction to so and so, it was so much easier when someone had a video tutorial on there and I could see where to click and where to go. So in that way, also when you show certain concepts and even math, it's sometimes easier to annotate and show things than having written content. But then the advantage of written content is also that you sometimes can look up things very quickly and efficiently, like the documentation. I mean, if you use, for example, scikit-learn and you want to know what a default parameter is, you wouldn't look for a video and then scroll to the video and see where you can find an explanation. You would just search online, go to the documentation, Command F, type in something and find it. And I feel like the same thing is also when we develop educational content. They're both use cases where if you search, text is more efficient. If you want to really learn about something, then video content might be more efficient. And it might be also interesting to see maybe in the future how we can use machine learning or deep learning to better search in videos, because I think this is not really there yet. There could be an option where you have the closed captioning of the video. You search those and find the place, and then you jump to the video in that section. But I think it's just something that is not very widely used yet. So you can't just search for some text and then it brings you to the YouTube video at the timestamp. So I think in that case, both are still useful. My focus at Grid.ai will probably be more on the video content, but I still think written content is very useful and important. Also for me personally, when I do my lectures or in general, I start with writing things because it's somehow the more, I would say, more complete medium when you make a video, you don't want to have text everywhere, right? And personally, when I make lectures or something, I don't have any lecture like subtitles or notes that I read off. It's just really, I look at the slide, I have a figure, and then I kind of almost spontaneously talk about it. But it's not that like I see the slide for the first time. There was a time where I had some text written for myself, and then based on the text, I was creating these slides. So the written context for me always comes first. So I create something like very detailed notes, and then I create the slides. And I think it might be even worthwhile to also share these written notes in some form, like a little bit maybe more polished. So I think the same thing goes for people when they watch something. Sometimes like this supporting material might be very useful. So it will be interesting to think about how to plan this, how to create value that is also for different learning styles, because not everyone likes, let's say, video content. Some people also prefer written text because it can be more efficient sometimes even also. So
I'm honestly looking forward to maybe it'll be a course or short videos, whatever it turns out to be. I'm looking forward to learning from that.
Yeah, it will be exciting for sure.
So will you be missing anything from the academia life, or things that you really enjoyed that you
big question. So what I like academia. It's like this place where there's like this certain type of where you can structure your day, you can come up with your own projects. You are like very independent in that way. So what I will miss is, like we talked about, the interaction with the students when you explain something, and the students really light up. They appreciate the explanation. You feel like you changed someone's, not in the lecture itself, but in the grand scheme of things, you positively influenced someone's life, potentially, like career. And I think I really like that. It's like you feel like you're helping people out there, like by you're helping people on the path of becoming a successful researcher, scientist, or engineer. And I think I really like that aspect of it. What I also like, it's a weird thing, but when I write papers and you have an idea and you feel like things work and you keep working on it and you get really into the zone, I kind of like that too. And especially, it's kind of maybe almost like a little endorphin or something, like where you, when you submit a paper and let's say it gets accepted, it's like the best feeling in the world, basically, where you have your paper accepted, you are super proud. I kind of really like that too. The downside, of course, is also sometimes it doesn't get accepted, and that is it's like both sides of the coin, basically. There's also that thing, maybe one thing I will not miss is reviewing papers. So that is something. So I mean, that's maybe the only part I would say. Also about teaching that I don't like is grading. So I like teaching people useful things, but I don't like necessarily the part where you have to make a judgment call. What I mean, it's based on scores and everything, but it sometimes feels it's not fun to give people bad grades if they don't perform well. Even if, let's say, they didn't perform well, it doesn't. I don't really like that part. I kind of try to be very generous with grading, but this part I won't miss, I hope. So I like teaching. I like helping people understanding something, but the evaluation part, it's like one little thing I would say. I, I I wouldn't miss that part. Let's say it like that.
I had the chance to interview Sentex, who someone who I really look up to as much as I look up to you, and he was mentioning this that even though like he has impacted so many lives, he doesn't get to witness the same person to person interaction, and like he always underestimates how many people he's affected. Although like it's, I would assume it's similar, if not more, as in person lectures if you're broadcasting to a large audience.
Yeah, so it depends on how big the classes are, but I feel like yeah, so um, either way you have a positive impact, whether it's online or in person, right? So yeah.
So, and this question is from the audience as well. I try to loop it into this. This is by Nikan, and they're trying to ask what is the best way to communicate the story of their life. You mentioned grades aren't the most optimal way. As someone who's like trying to get into the field, or maybe in academia, or maybe in an industry, what's the best way to communicate your skill sets?
Oh, that's a good question. Personally, I honestly don't care so much about grades, really. I So when I get emails from students who would want to work with me, I honestly don't really look at the GPA or grades or something, because I think that is just I don't think it's super important. I do think, though, for getting admitted to a program, it might be important. It depends on how the program does the admissions. So I wouldn't tell anyone not to focus on grades, because it might be super important to get admitted to depending on how that system works. But for me personally, when I let's say if someone sends me their CV or their resume, I wouldn't look for the GPA. I would more look for what the person is like basically in the email saying about why they would want to work with me, like what makes them interested in that. Is it like just getting papers, or is it really they care about a certain problem? It's basically, is it a good fit? Basically, is it like, do we have mutual interests, like this type of thing? And I also value skills, like applied skills, because my work is very applied. So I think if someone has like worked on some project, doesn't have to be academic, just in general, like having some experience, like where someone worked independently, I think that's also very important, like because yeah, so you don't want to have like always like as a student, maybe you want to also be independent, because if you think about how life works later, you don't maybe want to have always someone telling you what to do. You want to maybe design your own experiments and these types of things. And I think it is important to also have some skills in that area, that you I mean, it doesn't have to be successful, just trying these out, that you have some I would say some independence, some autonomy or something like that, where you demonstrate skills. How to communicate that, it is a good question. So yeah, in the email itself, I would say highlighting that, because if you send someone like an application or something, I think before someone opens the attachments, the CV and the resume, they would read the body of the email. So just highlighting maybe what your interests are and why you are interested in, let's say, working with someone might be very important to, let's say, get your foot into the door, that someone spends, let's say, the time then to think about whether they could make it happen to work with someone, essentially. Yes, also for my classes, one big focus is to have these class projects. So we are currently in this phase at the end of the semester where the students get to present their class projects. And so usually it takes a lot of time and work, but this is what students also really like. It's like they have a proposal in the mid of the semester where they tell me what they want to work on. And then the rest of the semester, it's almost like 2 or 3 months. They work on their class project. I give feedback along the way. So mostly when they have questions, they come to office hours, and then we come up with some solutions. And this is also really fun. But then in the end, the coolest thing is when they give a presentation on like what they worked on. It's like a 10-minute approximately presentation. And they write a report that is kind of like a conference-style paper. I mean, the reason why it's a conference-style paper is because you have to have a rubric or like a same, let's say, restriction for everyone, like an 8-page paper, because otherwise it would be hard to compare projects. So in that way, I think this is also very valuable. People said that there were students emailing me, they got an internship, and they think it was probably because of the class they had like a project in that area that the company was focusing on. So I think it is kind of like this applied project. Classwork is super important because that's where you get your knowledge. But in that sense, everyone can take classes in that way. So and classes is also, it's very important, it's essential, but it's also very generic. It's like you learn a general concept, and usually when you work on something, you have to be more specialized usually. So having a project is also like a demonstration, like that you are flexible, you can take knowledge and convert that into something tangible, some real project basically. So I think having something that shows your motivation or passion is very important, I think. So yeah.
I know you've been heavy in the Kaggle community as well. You've shared top Kaggle solutions with the community. How much weightage do you put on Kaggle experience, if that's in fact in the resume or in the email?
Yeah, honestly, I personally haven't really done much Kaggle work. So what I did is recently, though, so for it's maybe a little bit of tangent, but for my class, I try always to come up with interesting homework. And since so much weight, like you said, is sometimes so with Kaggle, it's also that thing. It's really about winning it. So you try very hard to get the optimal performance, but so there's no, I would say there is no restriction on how long it takes you to come to the solution. It's like time is unlimited. Okay, the competition runs for so and so many months, but there's no comparison in terms of whether someone spends 10 hours or 100 or 1,000 hours. So it's only the performance, right? And I think in the real world, this is not feasible. It's like when you work at a company or something, or in general, you can't sometimes like spend that much time. It's like to get only 1% more. I mean, there are some applications. Let's say you have Google search, which is a search engine that is used by billions of people, 1% more accuracy, and the results makes a huge difference. So it's maybe time well spent optimizing that. But in many real world applications where you have a limited data set, I'm not sure if that's the best bang for the buck to just spend exponentially more hours to get a better result. So I think what is interesting is also to not look at the best solution, but to come up with something that is, let's say, within, I don't know, 5% of the best solution or something like that. Where I wanted to go with this, so I was just coming up, so it was not a Kaggle competition, but for homework, just wanted to have students also have this experience of working on an applied problem and trying to optimize accuracy. So that I think it was the dry bean dataset. It was like dataset that was not too old. It was on the UCI dataset repository. I wanted to have something where there's no, let's say, not too many solutions on the internet, something maybe more recent than, let's say, the Titanic or the Iris dataset. And then I showed them different techniques. First of all the gradient boosting algorithms. So we have covered in class random forests, decision trees, k-nearest neighbors, gradient boosting. I went over like XGBoost, CatBoost, LightGBM, his gradient boosting classifier. So all the fancy gradient boosting classifiers. And then also different tuning strategies like grid search, randomized search, the exhaust, what is it? The halving, successive halving, and so forth, hyperopt, and Optuna. So with Bayesian optimization. So all these different techniques, they're all very fancy techniques. And but yeah, the bottom line, the lesson I wanted them to teach with this homework is that simple approaches can also be sufficient for solving a problem. Actually, what I did is I tried to get good results myself, and I actually got really good results with random forest. So I looked, okay, what is the performance I can get with a random forest? And I think it was like 92%, 92.5 or something. So I said, okay, if you get 92% accuracy for the homework, you get full points. You can get better than that, but 92% is the cutoff. And a lot of students tried really hard and spent, let's say, a lot of time using gradient boosting and like Optuna and these types of things. And they got sometimes 92%, sometimes 91%, because using these methods that are really fancy, very advanced, takes much more work. It's like, and sometimes they don't always give you better results. So you spend a lot of work, let's say, getting this 1%, while sometimes using a simple method like a random forest can get you almost all the way there already. So the question then is it worthwhile spending my time like using all these fancy methods, whether, or I should just use like something that is off the shelf good. And yeah, also the lesson here was basically that it's good to have a baseline. So if you start with a simple method like random forest, you're basically done. You can solve the homework in 5 minutes maybe. So it's good to always have like a simple baseline before you start trying more complicated things. And when I remember correctly, the outcome of the homework was random forest was definitely not the best method, but it was also interesting. I think bagging was the best method, bagging with a logistic regression classifier, and I think CatBoost. Which was also interesting because it was not a categorical data set. So sometimes it's hard to know what is really working well, and it also depends on how much time you spend on tuning something. If you want to really get good results, you also have to expect, like if you want to use a fancy method, to exponentially spend more time on it, which is sometimes, depending on the context, what you want and not want. In Kaggle, it gets rewarded. In real life, I'm not so sure. So yeah.
This is again a question from the AMA that I'm pressing a bit, but what's your own framework like? As you obviously experiment a lot with these things. Last week you had shared what's the best approach to skimming different papers, and you were also having a discussion on Twitter around it. How do you optimize your own learning approach, and do you follow a certain framework of learning new things or techniques?
Yeah, how do I learn? That's a good question. So usually what I do is I learn like by topic, where there's something I'm really interested in, and then I really just go on the internet and search for that topic, and I bookmark all the different resources I can find and just keep a list of that. And then I go through them. I actually take notes. So I used to type notes. Now I'm back to writing them on paper because that gets me less distracted. But it was also funny because I was typing so much that I almost forgot how to write on paper. It took me like a while to get used to it. My handwriting was so bad. But yeah, I write these down. And then after I've done that, I just take my notes and then I type them up, but more structured. It's like, so people think, I'm not sure if that's the best approach, but people think, okay, if I start with taking good notes, then I'm done. I don't have to worry about them. If I just, let's say, type them up, they are neat, I don't have to go back to them. Might be true for meeting notes. That's maybe more efficient. But if you want to learn something, the way you learn is by going over it multiple times, usually, because usually if you go over it one time, it's not so much anchored in your memory yet. So there's actually an advantage in like revisiting your notes and then organizing them. And what I also do then is I write them up neatly. And I have a tool, I right now use Typora. It's like a markdown editor, but I try to use an editor where I have a table of contents on the left side, because that helps me like coming up with the headlines with the theme of what I'm trying to learn there, like having a big picture view. And what I'm also doing is I'm creating a mind map usually, like so where I have like the branches and connections between topics. I don't do that if it's a very simple topic, if it's a very short topic, but if I'm diving more into detail and I have a lot of material, I do this approach where I map everything out. And I actually also do that for my blogs when I was writing these, let's say, model evaluation articles. I was also doing like the mind map to see how these concepts fit together. So that helps me a lot. And while you're doing this, I think there's no explicit learning where you, let's say, it's not like an exam or test that you post to yourself or something, but it's more like the way you structure things, you kind of get a better understanding, I think, because that's the thing when you think about how do I organize these headlines, should it be a subheading or should it be a separate headline? That's the part where you really try to understand things more deeply, the different aspects of something. What I do sometimes also is, once that's done, when I have my notes finished taking, then I usually pick out some particular things I really want to remember for the future. So, and then I put into Anki, which is like a spaced repetition software.
Space
where
repetition tool.
yeah, it's like flashcards. I actually, I have done that forever. I have, I remember when I was studying biology, and biology is a lot of memorization, and that was before I had a smartphone. That was like 2008 or 9. I didn't have like a cell phone or smartphone, but I think I had a cell phone, but a very simple one. So I was still doing flashcards on pen and paper, and I went on walks. So because I found it boring just to sit somewhere, like I would get distracted by my computer. I actually went to the park or in nature, and I had my flashcards. And people probably thought I was like a crazy person, always going with the flashcards there. But that really helped me learning, like doing these flashcards. And it's maybe not necessarily just doing like the memorization. It's about creating these flashcards, because you have to come up with a question really, and thinking about what the question should be, that is something I think where you also learn. And yeah, I do that with Anki. I'm not so good anymore at I do it like 10 minutes a day where I review my cards, but I have more cards right now than I have time reviewing them, so I sometimes get a little bit behind. I have like this counter of like 200 unreviewed cards or something, so I have to think about how to maybe do this more efficiently. But that's also a good way to learn. I mean, I'm not learning for an exam, but sometimes I feel like when I learn something just for myself, I don't want to lose it because it's so cool. I want to remember this, and then I put it in there basically. So yeah.
It's
Actually,
very...
oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so also sometimes I use my so I have different categories. I have like math, machine learning, statistics, biology, also computing, and I have weird things like there's one thing for some reason I can't remember this, how to rename multiple files in the command line in Bash. And I once in a while I remember that, but it's also for myself. It's like a good like a lookup resource. Sometimes I need to do that, and then I just go to my Anki and search for this Bash rename, and then I use that, copy paste it, and so it's kind of like also a knowledge base in a way for me. Yeah.
I was just going to say, to me, it's very inspiring. I think of myself as a early intermediate slash bad machine learning engineer student, and even someone at your level is constantly reevaluating how to approach materials, and it's such a nice reminder that I would always assume that this is how you learn things. You just read stuff and you're supposed to remember it. But now I'm learning, oh, you should be spaced repeating things, and you should be creating flashcards. You should be
I'm not
having
sure
notes.
that's the best approach though, but yeah, that's what I like doing. Yeah.
I follow the same one. That's why I'm mentioning that.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a question by Alejandro. Do you have any resources that you prefer for learning theory just using audio? So any podcast that you listen to or such?
Okay, that's a good point. So yeah, I honestly don't know any good theory podcast or audio. It's mostly always like I think it's because it's very hard. I remember there's this book, it's on causal inference or causality, and there's an audiobook version of this, the Book of Why, I think. I tried this as an audiobook, and I had to stop it because I need this like visualized almost. I need, or at least I have to sit down and write it down, or certain things, because sometimes it's hard to just do certain things in audio. And honestly, what I did is I liked like educational podcasts a lot, but I don't do this so much anymore because Yeah, and it's also important to take breaks, in my opinion, like because when you work the whole day, right now when I listen to podcasts, it's more like for entertainment. When I'm,
Mhm.
let's say, if there's some really long, boring drive, then I do like a podcast for entertainment. But then also, I feel like it helps me being more refreshed when I'm back at my desk. So because yeah, doing a podcast, listening to a more like complicated podcast while doing something else, it's really you have to focus a lot, and then it's so much more effort in that way. I feel like it's maybe not the best bang for the buck in that way. So I try right now, if I have free time, I try to spend that free time on, let's say, entertainment or like relaxing. And then when I'm back at my desk, I use the resources that give me the most bang for the buck in terms of learning, and that is like usually video and text. So yeah, I don't have any recommendations for audio podcasts that are very educational, but I like interview podcasts actually. So I usually because it's something where you can always learn something new, but it's not where you have to focus on like having some visual symbols in your mind when you think about math or something like that. So yeah.
That's that's again a nice reminder that you're trying to optimize for amount of learning per unit time, something like that, and you should always be focusing in that direction.
Yeah. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the brain is like a muscle in that way. You have to also have some breaks in that way. So it's like the more sometimes it feels okay, maybe I could use my time better by learning all the time. But I feel like over time you get tired, and then when you learn, you don't learn as efficiently. I feel like I don't know, but it's just like yeah, my opinion. Or maybe I'm just getting old. Yeah.
I'm in the same boat as it. Okay, so the next questions will be in random order since these are from email and I want to make sure I cover them. Uh, if you were a biologist who self-learned machine learning, which directions and topics would you focus on today for the best opportunity career-wise? Any data sets you work on to build a good profile or assets?
Okay. So that's a good question. For I think yeah. So I feel like in biology, I don't know any general data sets in that way. Biology is also a very big field. So there are, for example, there's the CASP competition where people get, let's say, a protein structure that they have to refine, or they predict a structure from a sequence, for example. That is where AlphaFold was also participating. So that would be like something like Kaggle, but for biologists. But again, this is very specialized. So this would be for structural biology. So, and biology, I mean, there are so many different fields from neurobiology, structural biology, genomics, drug discovery. There are so many subfields. Every subfield has its own data set. So right now we are working on, let's say, the more like not drug discovery, but more like molecular screening. So drug discovery is very specific, but sometimes you just want to find a bioactive ligand. And there are also benchmark data sets. So you can usually find benchmark data sets in all areas. I don't know that much about genomics, I must say. I'm more like familiar with structural biology and small molecules. But then neurobiology, they have a lot of data too, like the whole MRI scan. So I I would say if you are a biologist, or if you're interested in biology, there's also the thing that you really have to focus on a sub area, because you can't do all of these things really. It's like the same with machine learning. I try to keep up with natural language processing, but I would say more like a computer vision person. Although I'm also, again, more general. I learn a little bit here and there, things like that. So it's kind of important to have a broad perspective on different fields. But then if you really want to do research, you have to hone in onto one of them, because otherwise, yeah, you only scratch the surface essentially. So it's I can't make a general recommendation for biology, but yeah, for structural biology there is, for example, the CASP data competitions to look at, and for small molecule discovery there are also lots of small not small, they are actually very big data sets to work on. Currently, or most of my projects are very specific, where I have collaborators that have a certain data set that I work with.
Thank you for that. Alejandro is asking this. Since you mentioned this, I'll loop it in. There's so many topics to learn at a personal level. Also, do you ever get FOMO, fear of missing out if you?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Oh, that's a very tough one. I have fear of missing out a lot, actually. I don't have like a cure for that, but what helps me is just to write these at least down. So it's always like I read also news and newsletters around machine learning and deep learning, and there's always so much more stuff out there than I could possibly read. I just take notes. So I have files where I have topics, different topics. For example, topic is transformer, and then I have subcategories: visual transformers and language transformers and transformers for tabular data sets. And then if I find a paper or something new or news that falls into that category, I put that there, and I have a checkbox, and I'm hoping to read that one day. But what I do is I also have a weekly to-do list. So every Sunday, so it will be later today, I sit down and plan what I have to do for the week, and in there are 2 research papers and 1 video. It's mostly a conference video or conference talk. Sometimes I don't get to even read the 2 papers because there are too many other things, but I aim for reading 2 papers. So I'm trying to aim for like having like at least some consistency, and not always, if you find something interesting, not getting distracted from your current task and jump to that one, because that is so I try to be disciplined. Okay, this is what I planned to read this week, and I have a list of things I want to read in the future. And if I see something interesting on the internet, I put that in there, and then each Sunday I would like, okay, should I read this new one I read or something I had bookmarked before? And then you have to make a decision which one is currently the most important one. And sometimes you will find you have all these cool things that you see on the internet and you keep a list of them, but then like 1 or 2 weeks later, okay, that was actually cool, but it was not that cool. So actually, so just putting that down and then not immediately jumping to it, but just maybe thinking about revisiting it later might be something to kind of like at least curb the fear of missing out a little bit. But it is tricky because there are so many things out there that are exciting and you can't do everything really. Yeah.
That's fascinating to know, Sebastian. I love your opinion on this. I know you mentioned you shouldn't try to read all papers. As someone like me who's early in their career, I feel like for me, I try to read the impactful papers. So I'm reading sometimes more than one paper a day, just because these are these classic papers. Mask RCNN was on my desk today. FCN was there on my desk. Do you think this is the right approach for at least for the classical papers, if you're trying to read more of them just to establish your understanding?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I also wanted to say I read, let's say, more than 2 papers a week, but with reading, I meant really like reading them in detail. So like the most papers I just skim, to be honest. I have maybe like 5 papers a week that I skim. I think it's a good point. There are some.
Sorry, I meant it in the same sense. As someone who's just starting out, I feel they should be reading more just to catch up. And once they have the understanding, then they can probably really understand 1 or 2 papers a week once they have a good understanding. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because papers, this goes back to the question why you read the paper, right? So, and this is also why I don't have like a reference manager for papers where I take notes about that paper. I have more like something where I have projects, and then for each project I take notes about that paper, because sometimes I read the same paper multiple times for different purposes. And I think that goes kind of what you said is when you read the paper, so depends on what you're interested in. Are you interested in the hyperparameters? Maybe then you read the section differently compared to a math part or something like that, or the related work part. Sometimes I honestly just read a paper because I want to know the related work, and then I follow up with the related work. I don't so much care about the method itself. So sometimes I just have a good introduction or related work section. And yeah, here it really depends. I think it makes sense to read a lot of papers, but I think it doesn't make so much sense to read a lot of papers in detail. So like skimming a lot of papers makes a lot of sense and focusing on certain sections. But also if you think about like a topic you are already familiar with, it doesn't make so much sense to read the complete papers in detail, because the introduction is kind of like similar every time, every paper. It's just something necessary that the authors have to provide, but then it would be kind of not very efficient to read every introduction in detail, so you can jump to the most interesting parts. So in that way, yeah, being a little bit I would say, time efficient with papers is also, I think, important. But yeah, sometimes also there's no, I would say, a rule of thumb how long it should take, because it really depends on why you read the paper. If you do a review, you have to spend maybe 3 or 4 hours. If you only care about, okay, how did they tune the hyperparameters? Is there like a learning rate schedule I find useful? You read that particular section, it can be 5 minutes, right? Yeah, so it doesn't make sense if you only want to know about the learning rate schedule in the paper they use to read all about the related work or something like that. So yeah, there's, I think, a trade-off between what you want to get out of this paper, but also learning something useful. I think that's a tricky question. I wish I could read more papers, but then you also have to always think about, okay, instead of reading the paper, you could also read a textbook which has more information, which is more dense about certain things. So of course, in an ideal world, I would do everything, but it's always like trading off things also. Yeah.
That's great advice. Sebastian, is it okay to squeeze in another question? I know we're out of
Sure,
schedule.
we can do one more.
So this is by Brian Bishop, who's from Weights and Biases. What machine learning topic doesn't get enough attention that students should absolutely know? So any underrated topic?
Students, I would say nowadays there's a lot of hype around deep learning, which is reasonable, which is totally justified. But then at the expense of deep learning, we sometimes forget the traditional methods. So maybe not necessarily something like, naive Bayes and SVMs are also very important fundamentals, but I think gradient boosting. Honestly, I have even colleagues, let's say, who are not super familiar with gradient boosting, because it's somewhere in between like traditional methods and deep learning, not in terms of how they work, but the timeline. So SVMs were like super popular in the 90s. Everyone knows about them in some way. And a lot of classes teach you these types of things. And then there are classes that teach you about neural networks and deep learning. But I think when I looked at syllabi, a lot of people don't talk about gradient boosting. And I think this is something important to teach, I feel like. So I feel like this is an underappreciated technique in a sense. Might not be true everywhere. I think, your mileage may vary, but I feel like this is like a thing in your tool bag to know about, if that makes sense.
Awesome. On that note, I'll try to wrap up, and I'll remind the audience that Sebastian, as you mentioned, in the not the fourth edition in the newer edition of this book, he'll be covering these topics. So keep an eye out for that. I'm guessing in the first part of next year, we should be able to witness that. And let me quickly share my screen and remind the audience to follow Sebastian on Twitter. He is at RASBT. That is again at RASBT. That's his handle on Twitter. I always learn a lot just based on the resources he shares there. You can also hop over to his website from there and find his courses on YouTube. They're incredibly education packed and really high quality. Any other platform you want to mention?
I don't have anything else in mind, but thank you so much. I wanted to just say something about my Twitter handle, actually, because there wasn't a question, but I think just wanted to talk about it. So it's short for Raschka Sebastian, and I spent a lot of time back then coming up with a handle. So RA for Raschka and SBT for Sebastian, because that was like a long time ago when Twitter had a 140 character limit, and short handle was very precious. So I really tried very hard to come up with something as short as possible. Now it's a little bit awkward maybe to remember RASBT, but yeah, that's where it's coming from, because back then characters were very precious on Twitter. So nowadays I wish I had maybe a more longer Twitter handle that is, let's say, more like easy to remember or something. But yeah. No, thanks so much for the invitation. Yeah, thanks so much for also talking about my book. And yeah, that was like a fun hour to spend here. I really enjoyed it.
So thanks for your time. It was an honor to have you on the podcast earlier, and again an honor to learn from you live this time and also have the audience to win. So thanks so much to you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, and have a good rest of the day then.
So I'll end the live stream here. Thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the questions.